What's going on, guys? In this episode, we're going to break down individualized training. And so to start, what I want to do is give you some background and some context on stuff that we've done here at OPP and a little bit of background like on the baseball industry as a whole. And so what I started doing in 2015 through 2017 is I just trained extremely hard and I did a lot of research on everything that I could. So I tested multiple methods, philosophies, periodization schemes and things like that. And I did it with a friend. And then I would always find the hardest workers on my college team and I would just do stuff with them. That's it. We would just live and die in the weight room, testing as much stuff as we could. And I got pretty good results doing that because I was just training extremely hard. But I also had a really good training partner every time that I went to the gym. And so I felt like the environment from that allowed me to get a lot of the gains that I had early on. And these weren't like newbie gains. I've been training seriously throughout my entire college career. I was already fairly strong, but these gains were actually more so towards the performance side. So I started to feel more explosive. I started to get faster. I started to swing harder and I started to throw harder. And those things started happening for me, just starting out really basic, doing a lot of education on my own and training extremely hard with a training partner. And throughout that time, right around 2017, I started heavily investing into other people training me because I figured there was a lot more that I needed to learn. And I went to several facilities. I did several private coaching sessions around Arizona when I lived there, in California when I lived there. And the industry started to make a change, and it was towards individualized training. And when I saw that, I thought that that was the way. Like there was a reason behind it, right? Because everybody's doing these assessments and they're telling you that these assessments are going to be individualized to a T just for you. And then what really happens is what they don't tell you is that they're going to give you the same program that they give somebody else. They just want you to feel like it's designed for you. Because ultimately, like, what are they really going to change that's different comparative to the other baseball players that they train? Right now, like the most newest, like really green strength coach who just got in, maybe he's fresh off that CSCS right out of school. He's probably going to individualize to a T, right? He's going to do everything the books say. After the assessment, he's going to take you through this, block that, block that. But when you zoom out after a few years and you start to realize that you're doing the same stuff with all of your athletes, it's not really individualized training to the degree that the industry wants athletes to believe. And these are not just like rookie athletes, like noobs. These are all the way up to the best performers in the world. I've heard them on podcasts. I've heard them on TV, and they literally talk about their individualized training approach from so-and-so coaches. And over the years, what I've realized is that it is total bullshit. Like there's no reason why somebody, in my opinion, would really need a highly individualized training plan. Now, don't get me wrong. Is there value in giving assessments? Absolutely. But in my opinion, the only value from an assessment process from a coach's standpoint is if the information in that assessment actually changes how you perform your programming. Okay, and so just to be very honest with you guys on how we do it, we do an assessment process for our athletes, but that assessment process, we have a red flag, yellow flag, green flag system. Red flag stuff is stuff for us that is out of the blue. That is abnormal or extremely bad movement capabilities at whatever joint that we're assessing or whatever the movement profile is that we're assessing for that particular thing. If it is a red flag, we do alter the training for that athlete on our mobility days. We also alter the training for that athlete in their warm-ups. We alter some of the exercises. Simply like if you have a hip impingement, like you're probably not going to be doing squats on a low box. Like we're going to have to put you on the seated belt squat or something like that to alter the exercise in a way where you can still get the stimulus that the whole group is doing, but it's going to benefit you a little bit more because you don't have the capability to actually get into that position, right? And so it's very small nuances in how you individualize the training. And so for reference, I've been doing this for the better part of a decade. Like I said, I've been training. I've been working with athletes for free from 2015 to 17. If you don't really count that, I've been in it about like 7-8 years as a business. And so I've trained a few thousand baseball players from 14 up to the big leagues. In that time, I can tell you that most baseball players, most of them, a large majority of them, have the same movement deficiencies as others. Now, granted, there are some outlier cases. There are people who have come from Tommy John surgery, labrum surgery, hip surgeries, and all sorts of different. They've broken their ankle, and so they have limited range of motion on certain things, and certain exercises hurt and stuff like that. Like, there are some nuances with that, but it is not anywhere near as detailed as what people nowadays are saying. People are charging now for assessments. Back in the day, it was just part of the process, and it still is part of our process here. We don't charge extra for an assessment, right? But we want to make sure that when we're doing an assessment, every single thing that we are assessing actually has an impact on how we program. If it doesn't, then it's a waste of time. That is it. If it's not going to impact how we program, then there's no reason for it to be in there. Outside of the initial assessment tests that we do just to get a baseline for whatever the athlete's doing, whether that be jump height, rate of force, how explosive they are, how fast they are on a sprint timer, stuff like that. Those are just numbers, baseline starters, okay? And it's pretty easy to see like if an athlete can jump or if he can't, if he's slow or if he's not, if he can move his body weight and overcome inertia very well or if he can't. It's pretty easy to see. But what do they have you buy nowadays? Force plates, all sorts of different testers, this, that, and the other in order to attach a number to it. So that way you get convinced that by the time you're done with your highly detailed, extremely individualized assessment process, you are getting the most highly detailed, individualized strength training program in the world all by yourself. And you're not. Like that just doesn't happen. And aside from that, what I've also realized is we have tried both ways, okay? So even more context now, from 2018, in 2017 and 18, I trained side by side with a group. It was group training. Everybody had to come in and do what I was doing while we were in Arizona doing our training. So I had a morning group where I would go in, I'd train with them. It was usually all the older guys, the indie ball guys, stuff like that. And then the groups that would come in after, they would do the same training that we had. And when athletes presented issues in their movement capabilities, techniques, stuff like that, it was easy. It was like, hey, you can't do this, go ahead and do that instead. Replace this with an alternate exercise, go ahead and do that. Do this intensity instead because you have a velo face coming up for your throwing. And it was easy, okay? But then as we got busier and I started to see, like I already felt where the industry was headed back in 2017, and I started to see all these people doing these assessments and everything like that, I got blindsided. I allowed the outside market to tell me how I should run the business. And so what did I start doing? I started adding more fluff to my assessments that did not need to be added. I started trying to purchase more stuff for the assessment process that didn't need to be purchased. And then I also started tailoring individualized training programs away from the group. And here's what I realized. At first, aside from making it more difficult, I thought it was the best thing to do. And I also told myself that there's no reason in doing it if I'm not going to do it for a long period of time. The real scientific method, test it on a large population of people for several years, and then see the results and, check back, take out what doesn't work and put in what does. In 2023, okay, this is just last year, I realized that the results were not nearly as good as when everybody was coming in and dying together on the weight room floor. When we were able to come in together, train side by side with other people, compete with them, and go extremely hard in that environment, the results were great. And honestly, nobody else, I don't think, is going to tell you this in the baseball industry, at least, because right now data is the new thing and individualized, highly specific plans are the selling point. But you just need training partners who are willing to die under the bar. Like, that's it. You need people who are willing to sacrifice just as much as you and work as hard as you while you're training. People who are going to be driven by the same mission as you, whether that's trying to get a D1 scholarship, trying to make it in a pro ball. You want to be around people like that. You want to suffer with them, grind with them, and show up every day and train with them. Because when you don't have it, they will. And when they don't have it, you will. And you'll push each other. You'll make each other better in that process. And it's not just like some hoorah thing. That's real. Like, that's very real. And so in 2023, we decided to bang it. We were like, this is going to be harder on our staff because right now, what everybody was doing, or back then, what everybody was doing is they would come in, they'd have their programs on their phone, which this is pretty much standard for every baseball facility in the world right now besides us. And they would have their programs on the phone. and they would be doing their own individualized work with our coaching staff, monitoring what everybody's doing, walking up to people, making sure, we'd still do our due diligence as a coaching staff, but the athletes then had leeway to be swiping on their phone, to be sending text messages back and forth, to be checking their damn Snapchat and shit for no reason, right? And I remember being on the floor, watching the staff do their thing, and I saw a couple athletes check their phone for like 3 minutes. I know their rest time on dynamic effort was 30 seconds for that day. They took 3 minutes to do it because our coach was busy over there helping somebody with technique on an exercise, right? And so while he was doing that, they started to take advantage of the situation. You could see them just being, at the end of the session, they'd be so about themselves that they did not push themselves that hard, meaning they only cared about making sure that they got it done, not how they did it. And that sucks. That is not the training environment that I wanted to create. That's not why this company was created. It wasn't about getting as many people on the floor as possible. It was way more than that. And so when I saw that, we were like, hey, we're going to put a stop to it. We're going to go back to how it was. People are going to do the program that we have. And the first thing that the coaches brought up is, don't you feel like people will feel like it's not as individualized as what the rest of the industry is? And maybe they did, but we didn't lose one client when we did that. And guess what? The results have been 10 times better. Every single client came up to us after that and said, this is how we want to train. After the first session, we had every client immediately come up to us. We train, 60 people here, or 40 to 60 people here a day at OPP. After every session, the people came up to us and said, this is how we want to do this training from now on. Not going back to the phones. The individualized plans was a joke comparative to the results that we're getting now in this environment that we have. And to be honest, I thought our environment was pretty good before. It was different. I've been a part of most training facilities that you can name on the market, and it was different. We were screaming, smelling salts were flying, chalk was flying, weights were slamming, guys were getting after it. But the thing is they weren't driving each other. They weren't doing similar exercises, so they weren't able to push each other in that sense. And the results definitely suffered because they weren't able to do that. And so what I encourage you to do is, if you're an athlete and you are stuck in that process right now, you're on the floor, you're pretty much doing remote training on the floor, and the only time the coaches are talking to you is like if you're doing something wrong. Outside of that, they're pretty much just paying attention to the pro guys that may be on the floor, or the big spenders, the important people, right? The Division I commits, the guys who really matter to them. If that's you and you're just stuck on the floor, leave, man. You're better off going to EOS on your own and training your ass off with a friend than you are sitting there paying whatever you're paying per month to be looking at your damn phone trying to get an exercise done. Okay? It's a complete joke in my opinion. And don't get me wrong when I say that. It's not that I have this obsession with, or like this hate against individualized training. I just think it's become something that is so unnecessary. I think it's become something that has really tampered with the environment in strength and conditioning, which you need to thrive. I feel like it's tampered with the overall athlete's perspective on what they should be getting with their training, right? Athletes are coming in expecting, like, is this plan going to be made for me? It's like, bro, you're 14 years old. You weigh $150. You are the weakest kid I've ever seen in my life. How much individualization do you need? You need to get up off your ass, stop playing video games, and hit these fucking weights. You don't need to be worried about an individualized plan, right? And so and then you scale it all the way up to the pro guys. We had our pro guys do this throughout the 2023 offseason, 2024 offseason. 10 times better results, and more pros keep coming because they want that environment. They'd rather be pushed like that. And so if you're sitting there asking, well, how do you make sure it's individualized? How do people actually get better then when they're doing that? Like, how do you monitor if your training's working and everything? For one, we track everything. For two, we have trained a few thousand baseball players, and most people suffer from the same limiting movement deficiencies that others do. If your training is already targeted to have the stimulus put in place to target those movement deficiencies with your main mobility stuff, you're probably in a pretty good spot, right? And then as far as our mobility classes go, that's where it gets really tailored down to the joint specificity of what those individuals really need. And then as our warm-up goes, again, that's like a rehab process. If an athlete comes in and he has extremely limited IR, but nobody else in the group does, he's probably going to be doing some more pails and rails for internal rotation on that hip that's lingering or staggering behind, whereas others may not. And so it's so possible and it's so easy to be able to really individualize only to what the athlete needs while still maximizing their environment on the floor. But people aren't doing that nowadays. I actually know of a company, I won't say the name here because I don't want to deal with a lawsuit, but I actually know a company in the baseball space who has an algorithm created on Excel that creates so you do a huge individualized assessment, but the algorithm is designed to dish out a program where it has the warm-up already assigned, the main lift, all your mobility, recovery, all that, whatever, accessories, everything. And it's just the one particular thing with that algorithm is it's set to never dish out the same program twice. Why do you think that exists? So that way you feel like the program is really made for you. If the program was made for you, you'd be training side by side with people who are willing to die under the bar and chase the same thing that you are and train their ass off. That's when the program's made for you. You'll know if it's working by the results you get on the field and by tracking everything when you're training. It's really that simple. It is not that hard. But will people tell you that? Absolutely not, because it'll ruin their business plan, it'll ruin their marketing schemes, and it'll ruin how they actually sell their services. So to end this podcast, I would say individualization to a high degree is a myth. It's not real, and anybody who tells you it is has not trained their ass off in the weight room long enough to realize that it's not.